let me bring in Albert Breer, the senior NFL reporter for the Monday Morning Quarterback, Ohio State apologist. And let's start there, Albert. How was that day watching Michigan and the Ohio State?
Yeah, it was tough. It's been a while, so I think 10 years, I say 10 years, but like, as well as I do, like that one 10 years ago wasn't, it's like during the year that we didn't really have a full-time head coach. Luke Fickell was the interim. And so really it's like the first time I felt that way in 18 years, which is mind blowing. So yeah, it was frustrating. And it felt a little bit like losing to Purdue when we couldn't stop Rondale Moore, or losing to Iowa when we couldn't stop the tight ends. It's like when another team has one thing you can't stop, then it's a really, really frustrating experience. And I felt that way with the Michigan pass rushers that, they were pretty much consistently able to get to CJ and keep our passing game from really hitting the rhythm that it's been for the last month.
I know you cover the NFL, but obviously college football with Lincoln Riley, what's happened with Oklahoma, and how that we thought the Mel Tucker Michigan State contract was going to reverberate with salaries around college in the NFL. I was told Lincoln Riley was offered $12 million a year by LSU. How do you think this plays out with other coaches? Like, Cliff Kingsbury's probably going to go, hey, do I have to flirt with Oklahoma or LSU to get a pay raise here with the Arizona Cardinals? What do you think happens?
Yeah, I think it's just sort of changes the dynamic. And I think there are some people that would argue, Dan, that it's been a long time coming. I mean, if you think about like what players make, and if you want to really go down the list and look at the players who are making 10, 12, $14 million a year, that's what the top coaches in the NFL make. Like, there's no argument. Those guys aren't as valuable as a great head coach. And it's not a knock on any of those guys. It's just having a great head coach is as valuable, I think, in pro football as it is in any sport, right? And so, like, I think that there maybe has been a market correction coming here because of the value of a great coach in that sport specifically. And, I think it started to some degree with Matt Rule in that, like, I think, broke the bank for a guy with his first NFL coaching contract, where you had guys in 8 figures, and now there are 9 NFL coaches that are on 8 figures per year, but you didn't have a first-time guy coming in and getting $9 million a year the way Matt Rule did, and you didn't have anybody doing 7-year contracts. Yeah. But Matt Rule could command that because that's what Baylor was offering him to stay. So I think that that's sort of going to be the way the leverage game works in coaching now, where these big college programs, especially ones that are going to get desperate here, like your Oklahoma, like your LSU, that are afraid of sort of the music stopping and them not having a guy. I think a lot of, the successful pro coaches, all they have to do is just be vague with their answers for a week, right? Like somebody has them at a press conference, just be vague for a week. Like, I don't know if it's, give them the old Kyle Shanahan answer. I don't know if we're all going to be alive on Sunday, and just make your place a little nervous and maybe you cash in.
Well, Mike Tomlin wasn't trying to cash in when he wasn't vague when that story came. He basically gave a speech, which I had a USC fan who said, now we really want him even more with giving a speech like that. I said, he gave you a speech that he doesn't want to go to USC. He goes, man, I love the fire there. What kind of openings? It was a week ago, Matt Nagy was being fired reportedly. Okay, yeah. Still got his job. I expect him to be let go at the end of the year. Vic Fangio is kind of winning his way into it feels like a tougher decision in Denver. I don't know if Joe Judge is, these next 4 or 5 games are going to impact his future there. Don't know if you see any other openings or potential openings.
I mean, there's been so much turnover. I feel like this is like an annual thing, Dan, where we get to this time of year, and unless there are the obvious ones, and like last year was different because last year we really had like 3 stays of execution, right? Like Detroit, Atlanta, Jacksonville, those guys all survived after 2019, and they were on a very, very short leash going into 2020. And, obviously all of those come open, but there's been so much turnover over the years that sometimes it's hard to pinpoint, which ones are going to be open this early because you're firing guys who've only been in their places for a year or two, but I think the ones that most of the people in the industry are paying attention to, obviously, Chicago's one, and, the fate of a young quarterback is sort of in the balance there. So that's a big one. Minnesota's another one where, 2 years ago, that was sort of up in the air. And, if they don't make the playoffs this year, it'll be the first time for Mike Zimmer missing 2 years in a row. So I think that that's one to keep an eye on as well. Obviously some of them have kind of gone the other way. Like Miami is a good example.
Yeah.
People were talking about Miami. Well, now, Brian Flores and Chris Greer and the guys down there have won 4 in a row, and they play the Jets and the Giants the next 2 weeks, and Tua's playing well. So it looks like he's safe. Joe Judge, what does it look like over the last half of the season? I can tell you this, like the Maras love Jason Garrett. So the fact that they were willing to pull the plug on Jason Garrett in the middle of the season, got everyone's attention in that building, and it should. I think everybody was put on notice by that. So you have a few that are sort of, I think, percolating right now. The other thing is, I think, there's to some degree, I think this has happened in college too, where this has sort of forced these big swings, like USC taking a huge swing at Lincoln Riley. There aren't the obvious candidates there were last year. Like last year, you had Robert Saleh and Arthur Smith, who everyone interviewed. Do you have that obvious, like, young candidate coming up? I think this is going to be a year where maybe you see more of the retreads. You see guys like Josh McDaniels or Raheem Morris or Todd Bowles, those sorts of guys getting second shots, because there just isn't the pool of young candidates that there has been in the past.
We're talking Albert Breer, senior NFL reporter and lead content strategist for the Monday Morning Quarterback. I'm curious about this situation, how it plays out in Seattle. And I don't have any inside information on it, but I have a pretty good gut feeling with Russell Wilson. If you're not going to make the playoffs, and the franchise has to decide, okay, what is our future? What direction are we pointed in? Do you want to keep Pete Carroll? Does Pete want to stay? He's going to be 70 years of age. Russ has 2 more years left. Could Russell Wilson pull a Matthew Stafford? Could he say, hey, let's just, you guys get something for me, but let me move on? Could you see a scenario where Russ not forces his way out, but maybe Stafford's his way out?
Yeah, like he's less passive aggressive than he was about it last year, I think is what you're saying, right?
Yes.
I mean, my understanding is, like, so his mindset last year, having talked to some people around him, was he wanted to view last year as like the launch, the last offseason as the launch of the second half of his career. And so it wasn't just, I'm going to assess my team. It's, I'm going to assess the way I train. I'm going to assess how I work with my teammates in the offseason. I'm going to assess all of this, because he was, I think, consumed with the idea, like, what's my legacy going to be? And am I going to be remembered like a Peyton Manning or a Tom Brady? And to do that, do I have to win championships? And so, I mean, I'm just here to tell you this, Dan, like, if that was his mindset last year, and he's really worried about like what his legacy is going to look like, and he views this as the start of the second half of his career, and he wants to have what Tom Brady had, at the end in New England and now in Tampa, or what Peyton Manning got in Denver after he got hurt and came back from the injury, does he think he can get that in Seattle? Because if he doesn't at the end of this year, and it's not looking great right now, and tonight might be another one of those national TV referendums on it, like, I don't know where he'd be in more of a spot in January of 2022 than he was in January of 2021 to want to stay there. And so I think your scenario is an interesting one, because the way Stafford did it was very, I would say it was just very conciliatory, where it was, I'm going to go in and I don't want to ruffle feathers and I don't want to ruin my legacy in this city. And I still love this franchise. And I want you to be able to bring me back here and put me up in the Ring of Honor, but I want to move on and work with me. And so, like, just knowing how image conscious Russ is, I don't think it's that hard to see a scenario, especially if they miss the playoffs, especially if there's questions about Pete's future, especially if the roster doesn't look better in 8 weeks than it does now, like going forward, where, I could see Russell definitely like going in and having that conversation, because I do think that there's a lot of people outside of Russell's camp working in that building that have thought for a while that he's on his last contract with Seattle to begin with.
Yeah, I believe that. I don't think that he plays there next year, but I just wonder, and you're so dead on with Russ and being image conscious. He's as image conscious as anybody, and you don't want to be that guy who says, I want to force my way out. You want to be the guy who says, look, you don't have, first-round draft picks, I want to move on. I want to try to win another championship, and you guys might need to rebuild. But I just wonder how much longer Russ and Pete Carroll can coexist with their philosophies when it
Yeah.
comes to offense. And if
And I agree with that. That's an important point, Dan, too, because I think sometimes we overlook this. Like these guys, and this isn't like, I'm not like just saying Russell, because I don't want to make him sound self. Brady cares about this stuff too. Those guys really care about their personal performance, right? And it's like you can't like ask a guy like this to shut down the competitive nature at like the team performance, and like it's okay, individual performance doesn't matter as much, because it does. Like how they play matters to them almost as much as winning does. And that's another, I think you hit an important point there, which is like, does he feel like he's in the best position to become a Hall of Famer, right? Like, does he feel like he's in the best position to really be remembered a certain way and play the sort of game that maybe he thinks he's capable of? If he doesn't think that that's going to happen in Seattle because Pete runs the place a certain way, and it's going to be run a certain way as long as Pete's there, that's certainly a part of it too.
And I wonder if it's a big market like the Giants. Let's say they have 2 first-round picks. Is that something? And I don't mean to do sports radio where you call in with trade scenarios, but I'm just looking at this because I do think it's going to be real. I do think this is going to happen. But I don't know if Russ goes, my wife wants to be in a bigger market, or I want to be in a bigger market. If you want to win, you're not going to go to the Giants. So where, could you go to the Saints? I mean, there's a couple of teams that have that missing ingredient, which could be Russell Wilson.
I mean, like I've heard platform's really important to him, and I believe Dallas was on his list.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, like they've got Dak, you know what I mean? Like, and I heard Chicago. This is wild. I mean, but there was like a rumor floating around last year that he liked the idea of Chicago because that's Obama's team, right? Like, and that like there was platform potentially post career there, and so like. I think he's very conscious of that stuff too. Mm-hmm. And obviously New York would be a stage, like New York, like going and being the Giants quarterback and maybe being the guy to help resurrect that team. And there are pieces there. Now they need to fix a bunch of stuff too, but there are pieces there, like your Kenny Galladay's, Kadarius Toney's, Evan Ingram's when he's healthy, Saquon Barkley, where you could look at it and say, if you drop a veteran quarterback in there, maybe that veteran quarterback can ignite that team the way, again, like a Peyton Manning ignited that Broncos team with Demaryius Thomas and Eric Decker 10 years ago.
If I was at that Ravens-Browns game, I would ask for my money back. That's one of the worst primetime games I've ever seen. But I
don't think you'd be very successful.
No, I would not be. I don't know what to make of the Ravens. As much as I look at Lamar and I'm fascinated, but it feels like he's a one-off in the playoffs where you go, man, he's really hard to defend.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're closer to being a Super Bowl contender than they were last year. And we know Cleveland was on a lot of the short list of playing in the AFC title game here.
Yeah.
So they're both kind of interesting. The Ravens feel lucky. They've survived here, which I guess that's what you want. But are the Ravens a Super Bowl contender?
I think these two teams are like in very different spots. I think for the Ravens, this is about injuries. And I give John Harbaugh all the credit in the world. I mean, I think he's done a dynamite job. And if they wind up with the number 1 or number 2 seed, I think he deserves Coach of the Year consideration. The amount of things that they've lost, like running backs are more important to them than most other teams because of the way they run their offense. They lost their top 2 running backs, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. They lost their left tackle, Ronnie Stanley. That's a sort of injury that can be crippling for teams. They lose Marcus Peters, their number 2 corner. You look at the injuries they've had across the board, and then the kind of ticky-tack stuff that's taking guys out, right? Like where their receiver room was like basically a mash unit for 2 months. And, Lamar goes down and he's out for a game. I just like, it's one of those things where it's like, you want to believe they're going to be able to keep this going, but so much of it feels like smoke and mirrors. And it's a great credit to everyone in that building that they've made it work. And so I think with the Ravens, it's more, can we continue to scotch tape the thing together on a week-to-week basis because we are really, really limping here. Whereas with the Browns, I think it's more, I would just say, I think some of the magic they had in that locker room last year where they were a gritty, tough, like there were so many things about that team last year that was sort of like, all right, like Kevin Stefanski has the culture turn there. I think with some of the moves they made in the offseason, they lost a little bit of that.
Yeah.
And so I think that they are maybe a little less resilient than they were last year. And obviously, since it's Cleveland, when things go even a little bit wrong, because of the history of that franchise, the way that team's covered, like they have a way of getting magnified.
Great to talk to you as always, Albert. Thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Dan.
That's Albert Breer, senior NFL reporter, lead content strategist for the Monday Morning Quarterback.